Alright, what's going on, guys? It's honestly hard for me to put into words exactly what I felt when I saw this announcement. The Metroid Prime trilogy is my favorite series of games ever made, and it's been 16 years since we got the last Metroid Prime game. So for Nintendo to finally announce a Metroid Prime Remastered was a huge deal, and it honestly still doesn't feel real. For those of you that are unaware what Metroid Prime is, it was a game originally released on the GameCube back in 2002, and it was the first time the Metroid franchise had been adapted in the first person. And for a series that was primarily founded upon being a 2D platformer, this was a pretty scary idea. However, after the game launched, people were quick to realize that what had just been made was a masterpiece. Metroid Prime is one of the greatest games ever made, and that is not a hot take at all. You can check virtually any list of the greatest games of all time, Metroid Prime is on that list. And I'll explain the reasons of why that is, but I want to discuss how big of a deal this is that Nintendo announced this. In case you're unfamiliar with the history of the Metroid franchise, let me fill you in on that. When it comes to the mainline Nintendo games, Metroid has always kind of taken a back seat in popularity to the more well-known series like Legend of Zelda, Donkey Kong, and Pokemon. And even though virtually every Metroid game receives rave reviews and perfect scores across the board, they just simply haven't been the biggest sellers. And there's a number of factors that go into that, such as timing and lack of marketing, but the reality is that the series has just never been able to compete. The original Metroid and Metroid Prime 1 had good sale numbers, but overall remained unimpressive in that regard. And so until Metroid Dread's release in 2021, the series was on a bit of a hiatus, aside from some pretty bad spin-offs in Other M and Metroid Prime Federation Force. And the success of Metroid Dread really did something for Nintendo. It showed that the series was once again worth supporting, and that after almost 20 years, people do still care for Metroid. And so it brings us to today, and 2 decades later, we see Metroid Prime Remastered in HD. And the story follows Samus Aran, a bounty hunter tasked with investigating a distress signal which leads her to the planet Talon 4. Here we find the ruins of an ancient Chozo civilization that fell victim to a meteorite impact which left the planet infected. And the gameplay focuses on exploring the planet, finding upgrades for your suit, and investigating everything that went wrong here. Now, as we stated earlier, it's a first-person shooter with combat that focuses on a lock-on system and 3D maneuverability that involves strafing around opponents, jumping, and utilizing the mini weapon systems at your control. But of course, the main selling point of the game is the exploration. You're equipped with a scan visor that you can use to learn more about your environment and uncover the many fragments of the story, and that's really all you need to know. The central theme here is figuring it out as you go. The game does little in ways of a tutorial, although it does explain the controls to you. You're left on an alien planet to your own devices, and the only way to survive is to learn. And honestly, that's one of my favorite parts about it. My love for the Metroid Prime series is very similar to my love for the Dark Souls series. And while the Metroid Prime games aren't really known for being hard, in a similar aspect to Dark Souls, they take themselves very seriously and trust the player in every sense. There's no hand-holding here, there's no guides. You explore, survive, and unravel. And the game does this perfectly. And if you've watched any of my videos before, you know one thing that I absolutely love about the series is the music. The soundtracks, especially in the Prime games, are phenomenal. They do an insanely good job at mixing ambience with the area you're actually playing, while keeping a funky beat that matches the rhythm of everything that's happening. And I'll give you a few examples. In all honesty, I've never found another game or another series that has this level of OST that fits so well with the gameplay. The music is an extension of the environment. You don't have the full picture of this game without it. And by extension, the sound design as a whole is satisfying on another level. Every single action you do is accompanied by a sound that makes you even more immersed in the game. You hear your metal feet tap against the floor. You hear the ripples in the air when you fire your weapon. And the insects screech and splatter in ways that most games don't capture. But what really puts the cherry on top of the Prime games are the boss fights. In another comparison to Dark Souls, controls. The bombastic boss fights are another highlight of the series. The boss fights in the Prime trilogy are always big. Now, while the way you fight them is entirely different, and they're not really on the same level of difficulty, they are equally satisfying, memorable, and a spectacle. Every boss is its own puzzle to be solved. They all challenge you in different ways and put to the test the knowledge that you've gained so far. And just like everything else in this game, they remain satisfying and fun all the way through. Overall, there really isn't a single bad thing I can say about Metroid Prime. When it comes to the benchmarks of a video game, Metroid Prime is a perfect example. But everything I've been talking about so far pertains to the original. Let's go over what the remaster accomplishes. Having currently completed about 30% of Metroid Prime Remastered, from what I've experienced so far, there isn't much more I could ask for. The team behind this have breathed new life into the game and made it look stunning in comparison to what we thought was a graphical marvel back in the day. Everything looks better, it sounds better, and it takes the immersion to the next level. I always thought the graphics and art style of Prime 1 held up very well, even to this day, but the remaster has shown me something that I didn't know I needed. I do have a few tiny nitpicks with the art style, such as the metal on Samus' suit looking a bit more flat this time around, but for a game that's in first person, that's not something you're ever gonna notice. But for the sheer amount of detail they've brought to this world, it just feels silly to me to even complain at all. As far as performance goes, I have had zero issues whatsoever. While I haven't seen every area in the game yet, from what I've played, the game has held a stable 60 FPS the entire time through, even when there's multiple enemies on screen. And for a game on the Switch, that's very impressive. Now, with this being a remaster, it does stay faithful to the original. You are playing Metroid Prime through and through. The only thing that I was a little bit hesitant about that has been changed are the control schemes, and even then you still have the option for the classic. As someone who has always played these games on the GameCube, I thought I was going to enjoy the classic mode more. However, this far in, I think the new control scheme works very well. I was a little bit worried they were going to make it weird, but everything is seamless. It did take a little bit of adaptation, however now the dual stick controls feel entirely natural. And if you played the Prime trilogy on the Wii, the motion controls are back as well. Again, done in a seamless way that you can change at any time. So for a game that was already a 10 out of 10, Metroid Prime Remastered only adds to it. To give it a numerical score, I say this is a 10 out of 10. Clearly, whoever made this remaster did it with love and care and respect for the original. And as a die-hard fan of the series, that's all I wanted. The only thing I could ask for is that they adapt the rest of the trilogy, because to me personally, Prime 2 is even better than the first one, and not enough people got to experience that game back in the day. I enjoyed Prime 3, I didn't think it was as good as the other two, but it's still a fantastic game that deserves the love and care as well. So please do yourself a favor and buy Metroid Prime Remastered, not only to experience this absolute masterpiece of a game in what is now the best way possible, but to also communicate the message to Nintendo that the rest of the Prime series deserves this as well, and that Metroid as a whole is a franchise they can continue to support. But that pretty much wraps up all my thoughts about this. Again, a 10 out of 10 remaster. Please do yourself a favor and buy this game.